here. I love you all.
Hello and welcome to the Scannain Podcast, your weekly look at the world of film news, Irish International. I'm your host, Darren Mooney. Joining me are...
Grace.
And Jay.
And we're going to talk about what we normally do. We're easing back into the format after last week's adventurous podcasting during a film festival. So we're going to get back to everything...
Top marks for effort.
Everything that you love about this podcast. We're going to talk about what we watched. We're going to talk about the film news this week. We're going to talk about everybody's favourite, the top 10, the new releases. But let's start with what we normally do. What have you watched since last we talked, Grace?
I can't remember the last time we talked, so I could have watched anything.
It has been so long.
It has been so long. I've been to the other side of the world and all that. Well, I took full advantage of Netflix in Canada, I will say that much. So let me throw out a few things we watched there. I watched The Mothman Prophecies, which I thoroughly enjoyed.
The movie.
Yeah.
I've read...
And Laura Linney.
Yeah, I've read the book, and the book is, mental, but very entertaining. And the film is similarly, maybe not quite mental enough. I feel like it could have leaned into the real weirdness in the book, but yeah, they decided to pursue something a little bit more grounded, in inverted commas, just so that you have something like a narrative. But it's fun. It's very entertaining. Nice kind of unsettling moments if you want to be sort of lightly scared without actually being scared in any way. And that whole sequence at the end with the bridge and the collapse is quite well done, I think. It still holds up quite well.
I don't remember the details of it, actually. It's been good for years since I've seen it. I remember enjoying it. But
it was quite good. And again,
it's fun. In a very sort of pulpy, trashy way.
And that Gear Linney combo as well from the masterpiece that is Primal Fear.
Primal Fear.
I like Primal Fear.
I actually really like. Did we all just agree on something?
It won't happen again. Darren, stop.
So
fine.
You can stop now. Yeah. So that was good. Then we found Mom and Dad on Netflix, which was out last year.
Yes.
Nick
This
Cage
is a heap of shite. I don't know what's wrong with both of
Grace.
them. It's so bad. It's like, I saw somebody in Letterboxd describe it as the first and most significant movie since The Purge to have an amazing premise that it completely squanders with no imagination whatsoever. Like, it was so dull. I was not even remotely interested in anything that happened in it.
I loved it.
Where was all the blood spilling? Where was like the carnage and the destruction and the blood flowing down the street? It was terrible.
And the baby sequence, the sequence with the baby actually had me on the edge of my seat because it was a rare movie where I thought they might actually kill the baby. And not in a gratuitous way.
Ew.
Spoiler, I'm not going to tell you if they killed the baby, but it was a very
felt that way about
nail-biting. yeah, but I mean, like...
I genuinely thought Russell Crowe would kill the child. He had that look in his eye. He did.
We're not talking about the film
Russell
anymore.
Crowe infanticide look. But yeah, that
it's
one...
a whole wild when you're out with Russell Crowe.
Indeed.
That one I just didn't like, and
That's a pity.
it's obnoxious and terrible, and nobody in it is particularly good.
Oh,
now, I know I said before I'm not really one for Nicolas Cage's antics, so I don't know if that had anything to do with it. Mandy is the exception to that rule, not the rule.
It is worth stating that Grace's Nicolas Cage pick of last year is Mandy.
Because Mandy is great. I'm obliged to stand for anything Elijah Wood was involved in, even off camera. Anyway, then we watched Miss Meadows, which was... First of all, it gets a point because James Badgedale is alive at the end. This never happens. Can we please take a moment to appreciate this beautiful moment in cinematic history? He was fully alive and breathing and with no sign of imminent danger at the end, and I appreciated that. The rest of it... Now, I appreciated how quirky it was, and I liked how sort of... the dialogue was all eccentric and like the performances were really good, and I thought Katie Holmes was excellent, but the subtext is quite ghastly.
For listeners who are not familiar with Miss Meadows, it didn't make much of an impression. It is, as I recall, basically a murderous middle-class suburban vigilante played by Katie Holmes.
Yeah, but she's a kindergarten teacher. Yeah. And she has this really sort of 1950s shtick going on where she dresses in these kind of very old-fashioned clothes and has really like sort of finishing school style manners and so on. And she's just adamant about, all the bad people in the world being sort of destroyed, which might seem okay, but I don't recommend watching it a few weeks after you watched like 13th and learned the sobering statistic about 97% of people in prison in the States have never had a trial. So maybe if I'd seen it before I'd be kinder to it, but afterwards I was like, ooh, this is a mess.
50 suburban vigilantism is a very particular kind of vigilantism.
Yeah. It's kind of a shame though, because like I thought for a while, like I was really leaning into all the quirkiness of it, and I was like, I could probably get on board with this if it was a bit more satirical, but it didn't really go down that route towards the end. So What else have I seen? Oh, I finally watched Abducted in Plain Sight, what felt like weeks after everyone else, which is... Now, it's not a particularly good documentary. It's very one-sided. It doesn't even make an effort to contextualize any of the weird rubbish that's going on. But in terms of like numerous WTF moments that will actually have you screaming out loud, it has to go up there with the Fire Festival documentary. If you watch the two of them back to back, you'd come to some very dark conclusions about humanity.
And Netflix.
And probably Netflix too. But no, the subject, I don't know if interesting is the right word, but like in terms of sheer incredulous disbelief of what's happening, it's really quite something. It's one of those documentaries that's the wave of modern documentaries about recontextualizing what we thought we knew in the 90s, particularly about figures. Is what about there was the Lauren Bobbitt documentary recently as well, if I'm thinking correctly. I have not seen.
That's on Amazon, I think.
Which is on Amazon, which is very much about interrogating the media response to that.
Lewinsky as well.
Lewinsky's had her own documentary, and you could argue even Finding Neverland is about re-legislating, and Surviving R. Kelly is also about re-legislating sort of mistakes that have been made in the past. 6 exhausting
pieces on that.
Okay, they're not necessarily great documentaries, but they're very important cultural statements.
They are, very much so.
Very much a reflection, and it's kind of interesting. It's nice to see that aspect of nostalgia. We see a lot of nostalgia now that's very much like, well, the 90s were great, and it's kind of nice that we're going, well, maybe we got some stuff really, 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 really wrong. Yeah, but I suppose the thing with Abducted in Plain Sight is that it's so contained within the family. And I can't remember what year it happened now, but I think this is going back even into the 80s. But it's just, I think the thing that annoyed me about it was that, like, the family are from a certain religious persuasion that I'm not going to name, but you can probably guess what it is. And I feel like there should have been more of an effort, perhaps, to contextualize their possibly warped understanding of sexuality and relationships and intimacy, and possibly how their upbringing in said religious community might have had an influence on that, but there was none of that. And I think in that sense this probably suffered from the fact that I'd watched all 7-8 episodes of The Keepers, which is an excellent documentary series. Incredibly thorough. Jay, get out of the room.
The only bit that I don't mind, the subject matter is really interesting and there's some very good stuff in it. My issue with it is my issue with pretty much all of Netflix's output in documentary terms is that they have this kind of we watched this episode, but at the end, but wait till this bit at the end, then it cuts to the credits. We have to watch the next one because they left a cliffhanger. They don't really feel to have confidence in their own programs.
It's almost as if very old-fashioned narrative.
Yeah, I find it extremely irritating.
Almost as if there are structural conventions.
I find that irritating in books. I don't mind it too much in
and particularly when Netflix queues up the next one for you as well.
Yeah.
Like
American Vandal is much better at that.
Well, American Vandal is satirizing.
Yeah, but it's also a better documentary than most of Netflix's documentaries.
But I mean, if to echo what Darren said, if you take the perspective that Netflix will play the next episode for you approximately 5 seconds later, then it's not like you're saying you have to wait a week to watch this.
Then why is it there then?
It's to get you through the bridge of created by or directed by, and you're like, well, I'm going to turn it off. It's like, wait, I'm confused. 5 seconds, boom, it's on. Might as well watch it.
Plus, in the particular context of The Keepers, considering each episode actually tends to vary quite significantly from the previous episode in terms of what they're looking at specifically, then it makes sense. Anyway, Abduction in Plain Sight, fascinating, slightly soul-destroying story, not a very good documentary. Then the only other thing I'll mention is a rewatch of My Best Friend's Wedding, which is very fun. Film. It's excellent. But you know what's fun about that is that when you watch it years later, and obviously like every single person will take something new from it about all the various horrifying, very 90s kind of subtext in there, but to me I quite liked it watching it on this occasion. And what really stood out to me is how Julia Roberts' character, Julianne or Jules, is sort of, now she's not a particularly likable person throughout most of the movie, but at the same time I find it interesting to think of her as someone who was shamed and pressurized so much by everyone around her, because they do this repeatedly throughout the film, where they say like because she's, you know, the ripe old age of 28 and single and doesn't particularly like intimacy or relationships or commitment, that, you know, she's doomed to die alone and she's a terrible person. And everyone's been making her feel awful about this, including her terrible college boyfriend, who's now the guy who's getting married, for years and years. And then slowly over the course of the film and through some very bad decisions, but some of them are embarrassingly relatable decisions, she learns to just sort of own that independence and spirit and just strike out on her own, and I appreciate that.
I like Julia Roberts. That's all I was saying. She's very, she's very like she was in Homecoming on Amazon, which I watched.
I haven't seen yet.
And
I'm looking forward
I'd
to it.
forgotten because she hadn't really been in the cinema much even the last few years. I'd forgotten how great she can be. Yeah, I know. There is one coming, but I forgot how much she's a striking presence physically and visually. She just that look about her that like you catch your eye pretty much anytime she's on screen, no matter who she's with. But also she's a much better actor than I think she's given credit for.
But I mean that's the case with many of the actors who sort of came of age in the romantic comedy and the romantic comedy genre in general.
Yeah, no, she's very very good. So I'm kind of on the Julia train. My favorite thing ever, one of my favorite things ever from a trailer is the end, the Runaway Bride bit where she's getting away and she jumps on the back of the
horse, isn't it?
No, it's the DHL truck or whatever it is, or on the delivery license. Well, she'll be delivered and see her in the next 48 hours. Where it was a fucked up the joke. Anyway, I can't remember. It's a great line anyway. I'm gonna have to look up the trailer now. God damn it, 90s.
Listeners, you don't need to look up the trailer.
You do. It's a great trailer. And,
the 90s were a great era.
They were. There's some cracking kind of rom-coms and stuff.
Funny you guys should mention that because that might be coming up again later.
God help us.
All right, so Jay, what have you watched since last we talked?
Well, clearly I haven't watched The Runaway Bride.
Or the trailer for The Runaway Bride.
Yeah, I've got a few. One I watched, I've a couple I've watched before the festival, which I didn't really talk about, or else I have talked about and forgotten. But either way, you're going to hear it again.
Well, we did only have 35 minutes between films, and there was a lot of stuff to get out.
Yeah. One of them, which came out, I think, in 2017, but I missed it, and I've only caught up with it now. It's called My Happy Family. Bill Jabiri, who's one of my favourite kind of critics, wrote it. I think it was his favourite film of the year. I think it was added to Netflix towards the end of that year, and in a catch up I never got around to it, so I'll get around to it. This is a Georgian film about kind of
is this the one that also David Ehrlich talked about being buried on Netflix as well?
His favorite 3 words, buried on Netflix.
Netflix has a lot
There's
of stuff.
a perfectly good search function.
Yeah, exactly. Everything cannot be buried. Like, everything has to exist somewhere.
It's
a Georgian film. How much do you think they're going to give it?
They're pushing it in Georgian, let me tell you.
Yeah, bet your ass they are.
Okay, I was just quoting.
Screw you, Ehrlich.
Yeah, screw you.
Sorry there.
I respect your writing and opinion, Mr. Ehrlich. And if you'd like to come on the podcast and defend your position.
I resent the way Letterboxd always plucks his review of something out and sticks it at the bottom of the email. I'm like, what on earth makes you think I'm interested in this person? Go away.
Because he's so massively popular and generates so many likes, I suspect.
But none of those likes come from me.
Tell it, Grace.
So, anyway. Moving on.
In any event, anyway, I caught up with this film, My Happy Family. It's a Georgian film. It's set in this kind of and it is the kind of setup as a kind of the patriarchal kind of look of the world, and it's just 3 generations of a Georgian family living in this house, this kind of smallish apartment, and there's like the grandmother who looks disapprovingly at everything, and then there's the kind of feckless husband and his uncles all that come around and discuss everything because they're the men and make decisions and everything, and then there's the mother who's played by, and watch me destroy the language, Shuglashvili, I'm gonna go with. I apologise for that. But she basically is the kind of mother, and at a certain point she just says, right, I'm moving out. She decides to move out and rent an apartment. She's a teacher, and she's just like, I'm leaving you. I've done everything I can. You are useless, so I'm just leaving. And this caused absolute consternation in the family because you can't just leave your husband. And then there's all the thing, did he have an affair? Do you want me to beat him up? Because that's the only reason. Why would you ever leave your husband other than if he had an affair? That's the only reason. But it starts off kind of funny in that regard. Like, it's kind of that kind of uprooting kind of thing that throws everything off a loop, and it's kind of funny, kind of sad. But then there's a couple of things that happen in it that's kind of thrown off in terms of what happens, and it's done really subtly throughout the narrative, and it's anchored by a stunning central performance, and it's really heartbreaking in how she comes to accept her kind of life as it was and in which year she's wasted, and then decide that it's never too late. You can just strike out and do whatever you want to do. It's absolutely never too late, and it's really, really good. Probably wouldn't have been my best film of the year, but it certainly would have cracked my top 20. I'd say I really, really liked it. And as I said, it is on Netflix.
It's on Netflix. My
Happy Family. Just search My and it'll pop up there.
Just look at Netflix and it'll be on the front page, slashed across it.
But in there, like thing to say, look, watch this, it's great.
Well, that's one of the things with Netflix, where they say, like, when you pick your favorite genres when you log on to Netflix, they actually tend to significantly devalue people who check world cinema. Because it turns out that people who say they like world cinema in their favorite genre film don't really watch it.
It's like saying you have a good sense of humour, and everybody can have a good sense of humour.
But
Thankfully, I have.
But yeah, so you may actually have to look for My Happy Family, but you can Google it and it's
but
right
well
there.
worth looking for. It's very good. Another one I watched, which I'd never seen before. It's a Leo McCarey film from 1937 called Make Way for Tomorrow. And
well, how did you not get to this, Jay?
I know, right? Leo McCarey would have made like a great masterpiece films and stuff, and this has always been talked about as one of these kind of devastating kind of Hollywood films that were made, and apparently very influential on Ozu for making Tokyo Story. So I said I'd watch it. I really like Tokyo Story. It's great, and this basically is a really interesting story about this kind of grandparents of a family who've kind of messed up their house payments. This kind of the kind of rag end of the Great Depression, so they have to kind of sell their house, and they've retired, so they're at retirement age, and they call their 3 kids who are adults and from families to kind of come and talk to them, and so well, one of the sisters is out in California, so she can't help, and then there's a sister and a brother, and they said we'll take one parent each for the moment until everything gets sorted out and whatever, and really there's a kind of feeling then that they may never get back together again in the way that they were very happy together, and then their kids kind of see them as an inconvenience, like, you know, they're getting in the way of our lives kind of thing. And it's just absolutely devastating but really beautiful story, absolutely devastating story about kind of the burden of that children have, or parents, the kind of impatience with the older generations that people tend to have, and this kind of it's really unsentimental and really honest and unsparing towards how people dismiss old people as kind of a little baddie, when old people can kind of very perceptive about what's going on around them and can see stuff, and won't say anything to such children and all that kind of stuff. So you see things from different perspectives in that way, that you know something's hurting but they don't see it, you know, that kind of thing. It's a lot of kind of shifting in that way, and it has this final act where he needs the good weather. That's where he's being told, and he says you should go out to California, but the sister in California can't take both of them, so, you know, this is a temporary thing until it gets a bit better. But they know it's not a temporary thing. Deep down, they know, like, and so they meet in New York for one last kind of afternoon, and this it takes place most of the final act, and it is one of those dazzling final acts I have ever seen in a film. It's really moving, really tender, really funny. They just go off. They're supposed to go back for dinner, and they just go off wandering off drinking in the afternoon. They go back to the hotel that they went to 50 years ago for the honeymoon, and the manager and all is kind of like, whoa, we didn't own it then, but, you know, they welcome them, and there's people chatting to them and everything, and they just keep drinking and like having cocktails at the bar and everything. Like, they're just like, fuck it, we're not going home. What's the point? And there's this kind of point where they reach it. So they know it's a kind of final go around in life, and in some ways, and together, and it's unbelievably moving. It's so beautiful and so wonderfully acted, and it's an absolute, when they talk about kind of classic Hollywood cinema, this is
up there for you.
Oh, this is top level, like. But and I just mentioned a couple of others. I watched a Jonas Mekas film who died very recently on Netflix, not the 5-hour one that Ronan watched, because Ronan is mad.
Ronan's hardcore.
Well, Ronan went to an elephant sitting still on Sunday morning.
Yeah, he did. God bless him.
It's not about an elephant sitting still.
No,
But
it's
spoiler.
Is it not a little bit about an elephant sitting still?
Well,
they're journeying to see
quite
an
miserable anyway.
Yeah, no, I know, but they're journeying to see the elephant sitting still, right?
I don't know.
I
haven't seen it.
The story is that there's an elephant and it's unmoved by the outside world, and it becomes this sort of metaphor, and they want to go see the elephant.
Okay.
As far as I'm aware, apparently it's like 3.5 hours away. Maybe like
so it's in real time.
Maybe it's like 1:55, but they go both ways. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, Ronan really liked it.
Yes. But so I watched Jonas Mekas film that was a lot shorter. It was 90 minutes, called Reminiscences of a Journey to Lithuania.
Was there an elephant sitting still
in
Lithuania?
There was not. This is because I hadn't really seen any of his films before. They're basically it seems a lot of them seem to be a ton of old kind of home movie footage kind of stitched together to make a kind of narrative. And in this one, there's a kind of a 3-parter. It's like kind of shots of their kind of family growing up in Brooklyn when he was a kid, or could even a little bit older than that. And then there's shots of obviously the kind of journey to Lithuania, which is their family is from. This is 25 years after they left, and then there's kind of a trip to other parts of Europe at the end that kind of ends it. And it's really interesting. It's this kind of home movies as this kind of memory palace of trying to get back to something that you've lost, that you can't. That once it can capture the essence of something you have, it can, like, it's truly gone, even though you can see it or touch it or feel it. And you can see it in Lithuania. You see it's kind of real poor, and it's kind of farming country, and the grandmother's there, and she's like 90 or something, and she remembers them clearly, whatever, but she's kind of that bit older, a bit frailer. So they're all kind of, there's these kind of snatches of parties and stuff, you know, that kind of extra effort of jollity just to kind of recapture a sort of sense of happiness and home and all that kind of stuff, which is really interesting. And there's some really sad stories about kind of, you know, a lot of it's about fleeing from the war and stuff like that as well. So there's a lot of kind of, you know, on the run from Nazis and stuff like that as well. And the style is done. It's really interesting. It's a little kind of hard to watch in some ways, and that's why I mentioned the 5 hour one, because I think this will be a lot to take on 5 hours, because it's like the footage is kind of, some of it's sound, some of it's not sound, some of it's
just sliced together.
Some of it's
so when you say hard to watch, you mean physically?
Yeah, it's like it, and it's a lot of cuts. Like, it's really fast. I mean, it's really interesting. Like, I wouldn't put anybody off it, but it's a particular style of filmmaking, and apparently a lot of films are like this, which I kind of find a little exhausting to watch. Even though there's nothing technically wrong with the aim and the achievement
and the way it's done and the technique, and
but so I liked it, but I don't know how many of them I could. And I certainly couldn't be put a 5 hour in. I don't think that'd kill me. But and just lastly, I'll mention I caught up with Burning.
I'm ready for your hot take.
Burning is a
do you actually have a hot take? Because this is brilliant. It's live radio, ladies and gentlemen. I had no idea.
Burning is a film.
Burning is a film.
Jay's scorching take.
The reviews of this have been ecstatic.
Yes.
4 and 5 stars across people I watched it on Letterboxd.
Hey.
Not you. I'm not everybody else.
Thank you.
The other people there. Real people.
Oh, okay.
But I will say the positives of it, like the 3 leads in it are terrific, absolutely terrific. Like, and the story has this weird off-kilter atmosphere and unbelievable use of silence and sound. Ultimately, depending on which situation. And there's a couple of absolute standout scenes. One in particular around the kind of smoking of marijuana and the kind of sun going down, which is wonderful. But overall, this is like 2.5 hours.
Yes,
this is a lot. This film asks a lot of you.
Yep.
Because I got to the 2 hour point and I was like, lads, where's the film? Like I've a half an hour to kind of get me going. All right, I'll forget all I knew. You're amazing. And
but this is the thing. I was perhaps more enthusiastic than you are.
Yeah.
But the first half of it, if not the first 2/3 of it, were for me a bit of a slog. And it's interesting because
far off.
You talk to people who love the film, and you say, the first half didn't really click with me. It felt like it was a bit tough going.
Yeah.
And they're like, yep, it was. And it's
then
like,
how can you get that 5 stars?
And it's like the second half is really good. I really, really loved the second half. I really liked it, but it didn't. Like, for the people who loved it, it seems to have justified the slog, if that makes sense.
And I don't mind the slog in the sense that something clicks into place after. You know, when you watch them, then you go, I can't wait to see the first half. Because
rewatch this again.
And I don't feel that. I feel that it'll still be a slog if I rewatch it, knowing what I know. Also, I might add, the last half hour, whatever, what happens last half hour, which I'm not going to say, but I kind of expected that to happen.
Yep.
So there was no real kind of sense.
But I don't think the tension was, to be fair. I mean,
but then I'm watching it going, right, so yeah, it's over. Okay. That was a thing. That was a film.
Yeah.
No, I say.
Jay says no.
My hot take.
Jack Hughes.
Not my hot take at the end. I have rated the same on Letterboxd as I have rated Green Book.
Ooh.
Take that as a hot take.
Okay.
Controversial.
And I've seen
Green Book. Jay's on the record as his second favorite Best Picture nominee.
Not my second.
But we're going to get to that later.
I think that's an indictment of the Best Picture nominees, not of Jay.
Thank you, Grace. I've one more, but
not of Green Book, no?
No, or of Green Book. I've one more, but that's in new releases, so I'll talk about that.
Oh, wow. This is an exciting new territory for us. All right, very quickly, let's blaze through a couple of these. Because we recorded on the Saturday, a couple of film festival films that I saw on the Sunday. I sat down with Jay and I watched Fragment of an Empire, which is Soviet propaganda from 1929. It is
It's more than Soviet propaganda.
No, it is, to be fair.
Just be clear.
Just to be absolutely clear, it's an astounding, like, in terms of composition and editing, in terms of symbolism, it's a phenomenal piece of silent film. It's directed by Friedrich Ermler.
Who's one of the kind of underrated of the Russian kind of
obviously
time.
overshadowed by Eisenstein and stuff like that as well.
And Vertov and stuff, but he is.
But the imagery in this is astounding. There's some absolutely beautiful stuff, particularly with montages. But even stuff like the images
montage
that are
editing creative creators essentially in Russia. Like they're clean and unbelievably sophisticated films in the 20s. Like
I mean, even here using black and white, the use of cinematography and lighting is astounding. Like there's again, it's shot in the snow. It's at the end of the First World War or whatever. But you have like this characters who are marching across the snow with spotlights. So you have these little white spaces and sort of lines,
and dark and the
and it's absolutely sort of astounding in that way, and it's visually stunning. However, that said, it is also very, very strong Soviet propaganda, and that's I got no real truck with Soviet propaganda.
It's a Russian film for the 20s. Like, what do you want?
It's going to be what it's going to be.
You're not going to make a film if you don't throw something in.
The issue is that the entire final 2 of the 6 sections.
One of them certainly, the 5th section of the 6 sections, basically pauses the film to tell you all about the great works, the
revolution.
Which I'm not against, though. I like a cultural revolution.
I know, but I mean, like, I'm a capitalist living in 2019.
You're a capitalist, Darren?
You're a capitalist?
Darren?
I'm living in a capitalist
Darren?
society.
That's not the same thing. I'm living in a capitalist society.
Okay.
I'm not a capitalist.
I'm living in a capitalist.
Okay.
I'm living in a capitalist society.
Just glad we clarified. That's all.
All right.
There's no room for capitalism on this podcast.
I'm living in a capitalist society in 2019.
Sure.
And even I got the benefits of 1929 Russian Soviet, sort of values quicker than the protagonist. But Jay, who are the masters?
Yes.
Where are the masters?
Eventually you get
Who are the masters?
It's remarkably ripe, I have to say.
But
impressive for all that.
It is very impressive technically, and I don't think I've ever seen hornier Soviet propaganda. You pointed out that one of the closing sequences of the film is the character who has lost his sort of life, who's come back and has discovered that Russia has changed after the First World War, deciding that the only wife that he really needs is Mother Russia.
That is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard.
That
is also the most Russian thing I've ever heard.
Oh, it gets better. There's a montage where when he asks...
for me, only Russia.
But there's a moment where he asks where the masters are. And again, this is one of those great montage sequences where the characters explain to him, and they don't use title cards or exposition, although they do use one massive title card. There's a title card which may as well be Marx's Das Kapital in the middle of the film. But there's a moment where they explain to him, and the film communicates through montage, like the benefits of like Soviet communism and socialism. Yeah. And it's the horniest thing I've ever seen. There are lots of shots of shirtless, greased up men hammering, thrusting, pounding. It's something to behold.
Virile men of Russia.
Yeah. And I mean, I was under the impression that it was very cold in certain parts of Russia, but damn,
they work hard.
They work hard.
But that was great. The finale is good as well. I liked it. He walks away with that power. I need a great live score. Need the band playing.
Which was great. It's always really great.
Live score.
And it is to see a silent film, and it's great to see it restored as well. It is technically astounding, and I would wholeheartedly recommend seeking it out as well. In terms of other stuff, I saw The Crossing, which was very, very good as well, which is the film from, I think it's Beizhu, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's basically a story about a young girl in Hong Kong who gets caught up in smuggling iPhones across the border from mainland China into Hong Kong. It's one of those films that has, and again, I haven't seen all the Hong Kong films, but of the Hong Kong films that I've seen, generally they tend to portray the city as kind of cold and sterile and sort of remote. This is one of the rare films that captures Hong Kong as it actually feels, which is remarkable, and I really, really like the sense of place. It's also got a really great central performance as well. In terms of other stuff that I saw, would have been a new release last week, is not in the top 10. Isn't It Romantic, which is the Netflix romantic comedy starring Rebel Wilson, which is, I wish it were better. It's a parody of romantic comedies in which a woman is hit on the head and wakes up inside a romantic comedy.
It's a great premise, in fairness.
It's a great premise, and the movie does this thing where it sets out at the start all of the cliches of the romantic comedy, the gay best friend, the fact the only woman she's working with is going to be her professional rival, despite the fact that there are only 2 women working there, that sort of stuff, the rich billionaire who's going to be absolutely charming and completely in love with her for no reason whatsoever, all this sort of stuff, and then, sets up the romantic comedy, and all this stuff happens. However, the tension within the film is sort of twofold. The first thing is that, it's 2019. If you want to make a romantic comedy, and particularly if it's a romantic comedy that's going to end up on Netflix, you don't need to justify it. Like, Set It Up was on Netflix last year, played all of the rom-com tropes pretty much entirely straight, and was great. Crazy Rich Asians was a cinematic release for Warner Brothers, one of the highest-grossing films of the year, played most of its romantic comedy beats entirely straight.
That was great.
Yeah, you don't need...
I saw Crazy Rich Asians on the plane. I should have mentioned that.
That's right.
It was great,
isn't it? But you don't need to justify it. You don't need to make an excuse or provide a framing device. The second thing about it is that it often feels like, isn't it romantic, is using the, well, we critique the trope, so now we get to indulge in it. Having its cake and eat it approach. Where it's like, well, the gay best friend stereotype from 90s rom-coms is really horribly outdated and offensive. But isn't it great? Let's have a gay best friend who is every cliche that you could possibly imagine. And it feels like the film is just making an excuse so it can do this thing. And
ironically, though, or...
That's the thing. It feels like it's that sort of like, you know... Well, we
wink.
point it. Yeah, we acknowledge the problem,
so that we
don't have to solve it.
Yeah, as a thing. 90s, it's a bit.
It's a little uncomfortable, and I didn't really like it, which is a shame because Wilson is funny and charming. She does end up with one of the lesser Hemsworth brothers, but such is life. You can't get everything.
Less N-words better than no Hemsworth at all, I suppose.
Yeah, it could be worse. It could be Liam, right?
It could be your brother-in-law. The
So
good
wrong.
Hemsworth could be your brother-in-law.
There's only one good Hemsworth
There is
anyway.
only
The other
one
two were just
surplus to
also
requirement.
random.
Yeah.
There's only one Kim from Home and Away. Let's put it that way.
And then finally, actually, I didn't see this in the film festival, and this got a new release last week, but it's not in the top 10. Somehow, shockingly, it is Serenity, which has been one of the films that I have been most looking forward to. Yep. It's screening in Dundrum and Movies at Swords.
It's on Sky Movies.
And it's also on Sky Movies if you want to stream it directly.
I do not. I
If you want to give money to Sky.
I did movies, the Now TV movie trial because I got it for the Oscars for 2 weeks and I could have watched it and I didn't. And I'm not. Because it sounds dreadful.
It is dreadful. It's a car crash in slow motion.
I did warn you that it would be.
So, like, it's that wonderful combination of so assured of itself, so incredibly earnest, and so very, very stupid. It's like this perfect cocktail of, like, just being terrible. There's, like, a moment where, like, so the basic premise of the movie is that Matthew McConaughey lives on an island called Plymouth Island, and he's a fisherman. And he's
Matthew McConaughey, the fisherman.
Yeah. And
finally.
Finally. What were you waiting for? But the thing is, he goes out fishing every day. And he's hunting for a tuna. And he never catches the tuna. And in order to do that, he's pushing away business. He's alienating people.
Is the tuna a metaphor?
Oh, it gets away from this. It gets
okay.
better. So about 10 minutes into the film, after you've seen him like alienate a potential customer because he's so obsessed with this tuna, he goes to the bar. And he sits down at the bar. The barman says, "Me and the boys are saying you should give him a name." McConaughey pauses. "I already gave him a name." Dramatic beat. "It's Justice."
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you could say this in like the Matthew McConaughey voice though, where he says, "It's justice."
No, this is like serious. This is like
so he's not using his own accent.
He is using his accent.
Bale and Batman kind of
he's using his eyes, but he's using his voice. But you know the way when McConaughey's eyes sort of widen, it's like, this is a serious moment. I'm not being folksy. I'm being serious.
Okay.
And there's a moment like later on, he says, where the barman's explaining that you can just take people out and go swordfish fishing. And he says, "I fish for tuna." To which the barman responds, "You fish for one tuna, John. And that's a tuna that's only in your head."
Is this some like weird attempt to do Moby Dick or something? Except Moby Dick is a tuna.
The old man and the tuna fish.
But if that's how did you know they'll just find the one?
How would you identify?
Exactly.
It's
a singular
I hope
tuna.
that's explained at some point in the plot.
Oh, it gets anyway.
It doesn't get better, Darren. So don't stop saying that.
Tuna are very large fish too.
Oh no,
like,
this is
tasty fish as well.
Yeah.
It's
Just as by the by, like.
But
not that hard to find.
So basically, while he's hunting this tuna, his ex-wife shows up, played by Anne Hathaway, who clearly needs a better agent.
I love Anne Hathaway, but
most of the people in this film, but Anne Hathaway in particular. Anne Hathaway is his ex-wife, who had a son with him. The son is away at home doing computer stuff, because of course he is. He's a kid. Meanwhile, she has remarried, and she's married this guy played by Josh Clark, who is named Frank, who looks like...
Clark again?
He's in, say, The Aftermath, which is opening... Oh, Planet of the Apes, second Planet of the Apes movie.
Do you mean Jason Clark?
Jason Clark, apologies.
Yeah, I know Jason Clark. Josh Clark doesn't exist.
Australian burly.
Oh, I know Jason Clark.
Jason
Classic
Clark.
Batman.
Somebody put on Twitter the other day, it's like, if you can't identify the third lead in the movie, it's Jason Clark. Which is absolutely true.
So mean.
But he's...
And true.
and who also needs a better
Yes, he
agent.
does.
But yeah,
choice.
he plays Frank, who is abusive.
Frank.
He shows up, he insists that Anne Hathaway call him daddy while he chokes her, whips her with his belt, and talks about sexually assaulting kids. Meanwhile...
Hang on, what? That's a bit of a tonal shift.
Oh yeah, it is a bit of a tonal shift from the tuna fish Justice. Meanwhile, the plan is for McConaughey's character John to lure Frank out on the boat and murder him.
Of course.
And then get the tuna whale out there.
Yeah.
This is ironically
Feed
titled
him
Serenity,
to the
isn't it?
tuna.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Meanwhile, there's all sorts of other shenanigans happening on the island, including a strange
This is an
account.
overstuffed plot, isn't
It
it?
is. It's astonishingly terrible.
Christ.
The worst thing about, the worst and best thing about Serenity is that the entire plot, right, the plot twist is right in front of you.
In inverted commas.
It's from the opening scene, like the establishing shot gives away the plot twist. I'm not going to tell you what it is, right? And then the film keeps cutting away to sequences that are meant to confuse the audience, but with that
Is
context
it like
of the
a
opening shot.
flashback thing?
Kind of.
Where, like, Jason Clarke is now going to be the tuna.
It turns out that McConaughey was like...
Tuna is the
He's
friends he made
after
along the way.
Justice.
McConaughey had repressed his murder of Jason Clarke and turned him into a tuna in his mind. That would be a better twist than what the movie ends up doing. But the thing about the movie is that, like, while I saw the twist coming, which would normally be like a death knell for a movie that hinges so far on the twist, the movie takes the twist and it doesn't just run with the stupid twist. It, like, pole vaults off the top of a building into, like, a dark chasm with no bottom while holding the twist and shouting yippee-ki-yay. It is staggering. I have seen very little like it.
I kind of want to see this now.
Oh, no, not Darren special, is it? I don't want to see this. And generally I'll go down the rabbit hole with Darren on terrible films, but I'm going to have to eject from this one, I'm afraid.
And it's particularly creepy in its handling of stuff like sex, and particularly with the twist. The twist makes all this...
especially if there are allusions to sexually assaulting children. How in vogue.
Oh, yeah. While sitting on a fishing boat and drinking beer with complete strangers. Yeah. There's a moment where, like, McConaughey and Hathaway are, like, having their, like, film noir sort of saucy sex scene. And he proceeds to rip her shirt off and notices the marks where she's been horribly abused by her abusive husband. And the scene sort of pauses for 20 seconds. The music gets all solemn. And she's like, we're both broken, John. Just in different ways. Then the sex scene continues. The music revs up.
James Bond did that first. Remember, was it Quantum of Solace or Skyfall, where, like, he gets into the shower with someone who's literally already told him that she was raised in, like, a child prostitute house.
Skyfall, yes, that was Skyfall.
And he just walks in behind her and away they go. And it's like, oh,
Guess
this
who?
is a sensitive way of portraying somebody who was the victim of child abuse.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
It gets better, though, because the scene ends with McConaughey, after being on top of Hathaway for about 20 seconds, shooting backwards and yelling, "It's over, I win."
Hang on, what?
Yeah,
Whatever does it for you, buddy.
It's something.
That doesn't seem like a lot of time, though. I gotta be honest with you.
Yeah, so Serenity is available on Sky Movies.
Stop. I don't
You
think
can
any more
check
about
it out
this film.
anytime
Stop.
you
I'm
want.
just thinking of tuna and sex. This is not a good combo.
That's wrong.
Tuna and sex should not be in the same movie, in my opinion.
That's your objection.
Yeah,
to the movie.
that's where I'm coming from.
All right, let's move on to talk about the week in film news, and we're
Feeling
gonna
clean.
open with some very, very sad news. Actually, the
yeah.
passing of Luke Perry, who died suddenly of a stroke earlier in the week.
Pretty shocking, actually.
Which was
This
he
was
was
really shocking.
Only 52, was it?
52 or 53, yeah. It was... God, this is just horrible news. Like, I mean, it would be horrible to lose anyone, but there's something about him specifically that just always stood out to me. Like, I'm too young to remember 90210. I'm sorry, it was on TV when I was about 5.
God, I am not.
But I knew him most recently from his turn in Riverdale, where he plays just this lovely, earthy, completely pure character who's just so kind and such a wholesome presence. And then just the thought of that not being there anymore is just horrible. Especially because every anecdote I heard about him in real life then is just all these stories of how he was just a wonderful, like, gentle person and very sincere and patient with people, and like it's just too much.
Well, I'm old enough to remember not only 90210 but the original Buffy film.
Yes,
with,
where he was the sort of like he was credited as the lead, despite being he was.
She
credited.
wrote some nice words about him. Also wrote nice words about Donald Trump as well. But anyway, that's a different issue. She's
okay.
If you click into her Twitter rabbit hole,
okay.
But anyway, yeah.
Anyway, on point.
I remember
focus.
from 90210. I did watch 90210 and its original run a bit. He was the best thing in it by miles.
Dylan McKay, was it, if I remember correctly?
He So I think I can't remember which of the writers on Twitter. It wasn't from the show, but one of the TV writers said that he worked on, I think it was People magazine back then, where Perry was absolutely everywhere in the kind of the new James Dean stuff. And he's like, he'd all the adulation. I think he wrote that he'd all the adulation that he could have been such an insufferable asshole, and people wouldn't have been surprised in terms of the pin up of the world essentially, and the fact that he was such a decent person. And absolutely sound. And I think the other thing about him worth mentioning as well, and Grace kind of said it there as well, in terms of Riverdale, I watched most of the first season of Riverdale before it just overdone me because it's mad. But the thing what I really liked about it is he could have got by on easy charm of the 90210 and his character and nostalgia and coasted through it. He could have absolutely coasted through it without doing anything, and he does a lot of great work in it. He's a better actor, and he's in the new Tarantino film.
Yeah, there's a really good there's a really good piece from Angelica Jade Bastien at Vulture, which goes into, I think, a bit of what made Perry such an icon, I think, for a lot of people. I mean, the cliche, as you point out, the James Dean-ness, where he had the black jacket and the white shirt and the jeans,
rebel kind of thing.
But it was more the gentleness that sort of defined him, and particularly, like you talk about, the character of Bill McKay shone through that as well. I think he was introduced in the third episode, despite the fact that he's like inseparable from the show. He was introduced quite late, protecting a couple of kids from being bullied, actually. Which
and I think it was Jason Priestley was the de facto kind of heartthrob
for
the show. I know. But he's a good actor, and the
hot dads of Riverdale will never be the same.
It really won't, and the show apparently is going to dedicate all the rest of the episodes of the season.
Understandably so.
52 is no age.
And it came out of nowhere. It was shocking. Okay, so in terms of other news, because we didn't talk about this during the film festival because we had enough going on in so little time, the Oscars gave out their awards a week and a half ago.
Oh God! Right.
No, it's over and done with.
It's
over and done with. But
but we can talk in a nice, casual manner about our favourite thing in the Oscars.
Our favourite thing.
No sarcasm there at all.
I mean, there was some good awards.
There were definitely some good awards. Black Panther won score, costume design, and production design, proving that there is some marginal degree of justice in the world, even if you have to purposefully seek out the light. And Free Solo won Best Documentary, which obviously I'm thrilled about.
Which I've seen. I've seen 3 of the documentaries now, I think, and I've still to see Mind in the Gap and Free Solo.
I'm going on Saturday again.
Of course you are.
Should totally come.
But yes, I'm very much looking forward to catching up. The documentary's been exceptional this year. The things I've seen are really, really good.
I saw a video of the what was it, hair and makeup Oscar acceptance speech. That was a complete car crash. I feel like that deserved another Oscar for how terrible it was. Really, truly wonderful, and for Vice, which just seems in perfect keeping with that film.
Yes.
Anyway.
Vice is great. But anyway, the interesting thing about the Oscars this year, though, is that they actually spread the love relatively far and wide in terms of, I think all of the Best Picture nominees came away with at least one major award, including, as you mentioned, hair and makeup for Vice. But we're talking about things like, for example, the actor Oscar going to Rami Malek for Bohemian Rhapsody. We're talking about Black Panther
Bohemian Rhapsody and I didn't mention it.
Do you want to talk about it now?
I will say just one thing. I found Bohemian Rhapsody very boring, and I watched it again. I watched it on the plane, and sometimes, planes are not ideal environments for viewing things. They're noisy, they're cramped, etc. Anyway, not unlike a cinema. Hey. Anyway, we watched it again last week at home because my mum still hadn't seen it. Mum didn't like it. I still don't like it. I actually think it got worse in second viewing. But the thing is, it wasn't a film that I could point at and say, like, in quality terms, this is really bad. It's extremely questionable in very many ways that have obviously been discussed in depth previously in this podcast. But
Ronan was very good on it back in November, I think.
Mostly it was just deeply, deeply boring. I honestly, it barely held my attention for 2 hours.
All it can go by is that much shown clip, the much edited clip of the meeting in the garden of a pub, I think it is, or whatever it is, with Aidan Gillen.
One best editor.
Where everything cuts
constantly.
It's a remarkable minute and a half. It's the only thing I've seen of it.
That's it. I mean, as easy as that scene is to mock, and it is very easy to mock. But I would point out that the editing is actually relatively good where it needs to be, which is during the music montage.
So things like
the closing of the doors, things like, I mean, like, come on, we're talking about an award ceremony that gave Best Picture to Green Book.
That great film,
that
meaningful
masterpiece.
Jay knows shit. You should listen to him.
Yeah. Jay's second favorite Best Picture nominee
of all time.
Because Spike Lee took home Best Director,
which is deserved.
And again, Spike Lee was all of us. Spike
Lee didn't win Best Director.
Best writer,
Best
sorry,
screenplay.
apologies. Best screenplay.
I was like, what?
Quaron won
Quaron.
all the awards. I'll take
Quaron.
all 5 of these Oscars and go home. Thank you. Good night. That's my other 7.
But sorry, he won best screenplay.
Yeah.
But
He also won Best Reaction the night in that interview
Yes.
he gave to the BBC where he was like, it wasn't my cup of tea. Way.
oh no, I mean,
So proud of himself for
Lee,
that.
Lee is great in general because I mean, there's the
I
story
love
about him
Spike Lee.
getting up from his chair when Green Book won and trying to leave the ceremony
And not being allowed.
so pacing up and down
Also,
the aisle.
the-
The bit afterwards where he's asked, "What do you think of Green Book's win for Best Picture?" It's like, I think it's time for more champagne. And when pressed on it, he responded with, "It's like when you watch a baseball. It's like when you watch a basketball match. Ref made a bad call."
They did this. It was quite good actually because I'd watched it live at the Oscars, and the enthusiasm Samuel L. Jackson gave about both writing awards for the Lee when Lee jumped on him and everything
He
on
carried
stage,
him, yeah.
and then like when he gave it out for Green Book, Green Book.
Oh,
And
well,
the
I mean,
man-
there's
it's kind of
Jordan,
funny.
like
The reactive thing was very good.
for
Who
all,
was it that said you can't defeat mediocrity or something?
That was Paul Schrader.
Oh, of course it was.
But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, even
He's not wrong, though.
Even the reaction shot of Jordan Peele in the aisle
Yeah,
behind
yeah.
Spike Lee, which is just befuddlement rather than
In fairness, to Green Book, and I feel like I've become the unofficial spokesman for the goddamn film. For a film I gave
You
2.5
of all
stars to
people.
avoid that.
Hey,
2.5
oh.
stars I gave to it, not fucking 5. But anyway, in fairness to it, it's kind of awful, and it's kind of 30 years ago's race relations
Yeah,
thing.
it's the
but
best
it's not, I
race
don't think
relations movie in 1993.
like, I'm not going to tell somebody it's not racist because I'm not, of colour, so that's fair enough. But to me, as Hollywood has done far worse in terms of stuff like that.
It has.
It's clunky and it's grown inducing at points, but
and I mean, like, this is
it
the
has
thing.
it has its heart in the wrong place while it's wanting it to be in the right place. If you know what I mean.
I mean, like, that's the thing is that, like, again, a lot of people are very upset about the backlash to Green Book. One of the things about, like, it going online afterwards with a lot of people going, "Hey, why can't you leave Green Book alone?" Forget about it.
oh!
And I mean,
chicken out the window! Hey!
Leave alone this poor film that Bungee jumped in from 1994.
Yeah,
for
yeah,
the
yeah.
love
and
of
I mean, like,
God.
and okay, ignoring the controversies behind it, including the marginalisation of the Shelley family,
Yeah.
stuff like Viggo Mortensen using the N-word, Peter Farrelly exposing himself to Cameron
Cameron
Diaz,
Diaz.
Mother
and I
of
actually
They're
have
a bunch of
I actually have to
creeps,
I
a
have
lot
to
of them,
count in my head and make sure I got all one because I'm missing one. Oh, Nick Villania tweeting about
The
Muslims celebrating in New
the Twin Towers
Jersey
fell.
after the Twin Towers fell, which is not true.
No.
But yeah, leaving aside those. Even accepting that the film is, wants its heart to be in the right place. And again, like, this is the thing, it's a movie that, say, my grandparents would be more likely to watch than, say, If Beale Street Could Talk
Yeah.
or Black Klansman. That is, and it has a purpose like that. And, like,
and it
and
does.
maybe saying racism is bad in 2019 is a very simplistic message, and saying that two people can cure it by friendship is a particularly clumsy and an elegant message. But it's still something that's, it's not necessarily a bad thing to be saying at this moment in time, and
It's
I
just out of
understand
step.
that. The issue is that, like, when you're doing that, you are saying that, like, the hottest take on racism in 2018 in America, in a race that includes films made by two black people dealing explicitly with race, is the one made by a white guy who made it all up. And maybe
I'm a
the issue-
comedy director who really they should have had somebody better making the film to make it a better film.
Interestingly, I mean, like, I think the film's comedy is the one part where it almost works.
No,
Like,
I
mean,
agree, but that's listen. A better director would have made a better film.
better writer.
And a better writer, yeah. Because the story is actually not a bad one as these things go.
Finally, we'll close with some good news, or some news that made me smile inside, which is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse won the Best Animated Film, which was a delight.
Still haven't seen, but I'm hoping to watch tomorrow.
It's amazing. I look
You'll hear
forward
my
to
hot
you
take next
crapping
week.
all over it next week.
How dare you, Darren? I love everything.
In terms of other awards, closer to home, the Dublin Virgin Media Dublin
Vimdif, we'll
The
call it.
Dublin
Vimdif.
Film Festival.
Yeah. Wound up last week. We
Yes.
podcasted live from it. We gave our own
We
awards.
did not podcast from the quiz, which we won.
We
Humble
did.
brag.
We did win the quiz because we are amazing. Sorry. Anyway.
Thank you, and we'd like to acknowledge
Yeah, we're
the
just
hard work
waiting
that
for
was
the
done.
Bula bus there. Yeah,
That-
thanks.
the hard work that was
You
done.
can buy us drinks if you see us around, it's fine.
Well, yes, I would like to thank first of all my teammates, including Ronan, who's not here, but obviously Jay and Grace, who did phenomenal work carrying
Thank
my
you.
lazy ass up to the first place.
Anyway, we're all stars.
but-
It was the chips.
Yeah.
It was the chips.
But also,
Certainly wasn't the quiz master. Anyway, move on.
but also, yeah, just a thank you to all the staff and everything who put that together. That again, the festival's a phenomenal amount of work, and again, it takes a lot to bring it together. And I think that credit where credit's due in that sense. In terms of other stuff, though, the awards were announced this week. So there were a number of different awards given out, including the Fantastic Flicks Awards, which was the Children's Jury Award for Short Film, which went to First Disco. Yeah.
I remember it well
Just
in
that title.
1951, or whatever it was.
And special mention went to The Overcoat as well for that. And then basically the Best International Short Film, they nominated, Inanimate was lovely, charming, and imaginative as well. The Discovery Award, which is aimed to identify, champion, support, and encourage new and emerging talent from both in front of and behind the camera, went to Alexandra McGuinness, writer and director of She's Missing, Una Kearney, writer and director of 5 Letters to the Stranger Who Will Dissect My Brain, and Ian Hunt Duffy, who directed Low Tide as well, which is quite a selection there as well.
I haven't seen any of them. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
In terms of other awards that were given out, the Dublin Film Critics Circle gave out their awards on the Sunday, including awards to, I think they nominated Transit as the best film of the festival. Which is based on Anna Seger's 1942 novel of the same name.
I didn't see that.
You didn't see that, no?
I didn't. Obviously, you did. I don't think any year where I've had a favourite film this at the I don't think we've ever
agreed with the Critics Circle.
Well,
I mean, that's why we host our own podcast.
It is, yes. Screw you, critics.
Okay, or
sorry.
because there's we encourage diversity of opinion.
There's nobody coming back and nobody can
If
say
we
anything.
didn't come out with this sort of stuff, it just wouldn't be us. You could listen to a super sanitized podcast where we're all gracious and light, but that's what Darren is here for.
Yes.
In terms of Best Director, went to Bulbul Can Sing. That's amazing. I missed all of these.
That's it. I was like, where were these shown? How did I miss these?
Best Cinematography, which is an interesting choice, went to Hiroshi Ukiyama for Jesus.
Jesus.
For Jesus himself?
No, yeah, for cinematography of Jesus. No, but this is the film that Ronan saw the night of the quiz, actually. He had a slightly divergent opinion of the film as compared to
as Ronan does tend to on occasion.
He described it as a film that went from a perfect 10 to a perfect 2 in the space of a single shot.
Amazing.
Which is a rare
That's
thing.
impressive.
Yeah.
In terms of Irish winners, Gaza took Best Documentary. Did you see Gaza?
I did not see Gaza because I'd seen of Monsters and Men, or Fathers and Sons the night before, which was a Syrian one, and I hadn't got 2 days in a row of
sort of heavy-handed. Well, not heavy-handed, but like heavy and serious and weighty.
I couldn't do it, but it should have been Paul Dohan's Not What Time Is Dead.
Which was surprisingly locked out of a lot of these awards, actually.
It was the best one I've seen in the festival.
In terms of other awards, the best Irish film of the festival, according to the Dublin Film Critics Circle, was Greta, which we both saw.
No, it wasn't. It was great fun, but it wasn't.
It was great. It was the best Irish film that I saw. I didn't see What Time Is Dead. I didn't see What Time Is Dead, but it was the best fun I had with an Irish film.
It was a lot of fun. It would have made a much better surprise film than the surprise film.
In terms,
but then everything would have.
Well, okay, let's go. Let's put our other hat on, right? So we've had the Critics Circle, right? We've had what the critics think, the people who are professionally trained who review these films on a professional basis for music,
professionally trained. Okay.
Yeah, for outlets. They're sort of like, this is the cream of the crop. Let's go and look at the audience awards. What do we think took home the audience awards, the film festival this year?
I know what won one of them, which is Maiden, which opens in the
won
IFI,
Best Prize,
which I'll see next week.
Which is opening next week, which is
I didn't get to it.
A documentary looking at the first ever all-female crew to enter the Whitbread Round the World race in 1989.
Even though in an aversion to sailing, in the way I have an aversion to polo and stuff. It's a sport for rich people, so it kind of irritates me.
or like crazy people who just desire solitude. Because I remember watching Losing Sight of Shore and being like, I'd love to row into the middle of the Pacific Ocean and be surrounded by no people for thousands of miles.
I can't swim. I'd happy to be on land away from all the people.
I think even if you can swim, you're not really going to swim to safety from the middle of the ocean.
You're dead.
Still, though, I feel better on the water if I can swim, just as a sport and chance, rescue or whatever.
Learn how to starfish, you'll be fine.
Don't ever travel.
I don't
over
believe
water
that you can just lie in the water and float.
You can.
Yeah, but
so
then why do everybody die in the water then?
Because the air comes out of their lungs.
Have you not watched the that advertisement about not struggling when you... Anyway,
I have. That's what I'm talking about.
Starfishing.
It's nonsense. I don't believe it for a second.
I'm going to teach you how to starfish, Jay.
Hopefully,
in a very shallow pool.
Hopefully, the next 4 films in the Audience Award list will be a bit less contentious. Land Without God, which is Mannix Flynn's documentary, looking at his himself and members of his family as they recall the effects of decades of institutional abuse and the impact it had on them.
I imagine it was good. I haven't seen it, unfortunately.
Maya and the White Lion, which is about a single-minded girl who befriends and bonds with a lion cub named Charlie. This aired as part of the Fantastic Flicks.
I haven't seen it.
Which does sound really, really touching. I actually
beautiful documentary about my youth.
I feel like I haven't seen any film. How have I not
I saw a single one, so I literally
over 20. Darren's seen like 30, and we haven't seen anything.
I saw 36.
Jesus.
Other one, which is A Girl from Mogadishu placed 4th on the list, which is the story of Ifra Ahmed, one of the world's...
There you go, Darren. You're out of step with the festival.
Finally one that I think somebody in this podcast has seen.
And will stay that way, I suspect. Nobody else will see it.
Yeah. Yep, let's just say I'm out of step with the general public on this. I've lost my touch. And at number 5, Damien Callinan's Australian comedy The Merger, which is the story of a former Aussie rules professional footballer who returns to his hometown to coach his local club, which recruits refugees to keep it viable. That sounds quite adorable.
Just hang on, is that they're the top 5 audience awards?
Yeah.
This I've been saying this. People have no taste. I've been saying this for years.
That sounds like a more reasonable, open-minded selection than...
Have you seen The Merger?
No, they all sound terrible.
What?
Maiden
sounds good. Land Without God sounds good. Mia and the White Lion sounds lovely and touching. The Merger sounds even harmless.
Maiden sounds the best on those, and I will see that. So,
okay.
There you go.
All right, and the Audience Short Film Award went to 99 Problems, directed by Ross Killeen and produced by Louise Byrne, which is the inside scoop on the murky world of the ice cream business.
That's a great name. I want to see that. I absolutely want to see that. That sounds great.
So yeah,
got
that'll
99 problems and a cone ain't one.
That'll be touring. And in terms of other news away from festivals and awards, very quickly we're going to move on. The IFI well, actually, I may have misspoken. The IFI International will be bringing Irish film to the world this March.
But not to me, though, thankfully.
Not to you, because you already had your fill, apparently.
Yeah. Okay.
With St. Patrick's Day festivities fast approaching, IFI International will this March work with film festivals across the globe to present 49 films at 26 festivals, celebrating new and classic Irish work. Irish filmmakers will have a presence at many of the 118 screenings. Wow. With Lenny Abramson, documentary Shea Marie Doyle, actors Hazel Dupe, Mo Dunford and Hugh O'Connor travelling to 25 cities in Europe and beyond. So in terms of the films that are being sent abroad, we're looking at...
I saw Hugh O'Connor in a pub once.
He's charming. He's lovely.
Moving on.
Well done, Grace.
No, he isn't.
I met him actually.
He is lovely.
At the screen after The Favourite, when I was the only one complaining about The Favourite. God, it's a life, eh?
It's okay. If he knew you, he'd know that was fine.
I know he did, and he does.
Yeah.
Shut up, Jay.
But I didn't think I could like Hugh O'Connor anymore. But somehow it just happened.
He made a way.
But yes, so the Breadwinner and Float Like a Butterfly are among those that are sort of...
Float Like a Butterfly, which should have played the festival, but didn't. So I still haven't seen it.
Which is astounding. But yeah, if we want a quick list of the films that are going abroad,
quick one.
To Belgrade, we have Michael Inside, The Breadwinner, Black 47, An Engineer Imagines, Dreaming of the Quiet Man, Jimmy Murakai, and Patrick Kavanagh, No Man's Fool.
That's a pretty good list.
In Russia, we have The Delinquent Season, Good Favor, The Dig, Metal Heart, and Steel Country.
Nothing about gay people in that one, I'm imagining. Sorry. Russia.
No, it's a fair point. It's a very fair point. Elsewhere in Europe, in terms of Nicosia, the 35th will be showing the story of marriage equality. The Breadwinner will be visiting Zagreb and Sarajevo. Metal Heart will be going to Luxembourg. And the Irish Film Festa in Rome will have an entire selection of smorgasbord.
Kind of thing, actually, there.
Yeah. In terms
hopefully all documentaries about how terrible the church is.
Northern America, if you will.
One of the Americas,
the
in
most
the
northern of them. Well, not just the US, because it's going to Toronto, Montreal, Ontario, Chicago, San Francisco, New York, and Seattle. We'll be hosting screenings of films like Michael Inside, The Camino Voyage, and The Drummer and the Keeper. And then finally, if you're in the UK. Tyneside Cinema will be screening Adam and Paul, and the London Irish Centre will be screening The Camino Voyage and Sanctuary.
Good stuff.
So it's a rich selection. It's an amazing reminder of how good Irish film has been recently.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Give or take the Irish film that we saw at the festival.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I mean, I love Greta, and you loved What Time Is Death.
Yes.
So I mean, we can't complain too much.
But I shall.
Okay.
Go on.
Let's move on to talking about the top 10, because it's been a while since we've done this.
Let's do it.
At number 10, A Dog's Way Home.
Ronan is watching as we speak, I hope.
At number 9, Kobayati Mafi 2, which I have absolutely no details about.
Is that an Indian film?
I don't believe so. I suspect it's Polish.
Just wasn't sure
at
your pronunciation there.
That was the problem there. No, it probably was the problem there. I apologize sincerely for that. At number 8, I somehow haven't seen this yet because I have no real urge to. It's Cold Pursuit.
What's this about?
Liam Neeson
murdering
people in the
Mr.
snow.
Plow. The movie.
Basically,
Wait, is this
it was
like
called
the
Hard
movie?
Powder.
Is this a movie that Liam Neeson tried to bury with certain unfortunate comments
Yes.
about certain
Yes.
unfortunate things?
Yes.
Well then,
It's based on the 2014 Norwegian film In Order of Disappearance.
It's got great reviews.
really,
like,
come and collect your dad. Bring him home.
I know, yeah.
It was originally called. It was originally called
Stiff
Hard
drink,
Powder.
put him to bed.
Yeah, it was originally called Hard Powder. At number 7, The Aftermath, which is not a good film. We were talking about Jason Clarke. Whenever you see Jason Clarke in third bill lead in a film,
I
you
did
should
say.
probably be nervous.
I
I
feel
did
kind
think
of
of that for
bad
somebody
for
else,
Jason Clarke. I think he has a lot of skill.
Oh, he
and
does.
he
He's
always
great.
ends up in terrible movies, and it just makes me really sad.
Yeah, he works so hard.
He does.
Like, I mean, I remember when I was watching like Zero Dark 30
Yes.
and like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, I was like, I like this guy. He's gonna go on to great things, and then smack.
He
I
even
mean-
had a lot of fun in White House Down.
Yeah. The best thing that can be said about The Aftermath is that it's no Serenity. But yeah, basically, very surprisingly similar plot. In that Keira Knightley plays a wife who moves to Berlin in the aftermath. In Hamburg in the aftermath of the Second World War, where her husband is serving in the military. She moves in with a German family, with an architect played by Alexander Skarsgård, and tensions simmer.
Duty.
The tension simmer. It's somewhat let down by several significant problems, the most obvious being that Keira Knightley and Alexander Skarsgård have absolutely no chemistry together. Knightley's quite okay.
I just say
yeah.
that's Skarsgård any use though?
I'm not convinced he is.
I'm not convinced. Like I liked
I mean,
him in
he
what was the TV show?
He seems like a nice lad and all, but I haven't really seen him in anything
Me
where I
too.
thought that's great.
Yeah.
I'm tall. That
Just
seems
jump
to be
to
his
Bill.
bit.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
jump straight to Bill. Really is probably your best bet. No, I
Wasn't he in that TV show?
He was in
Reese
the-
Witherspoon one.
Yes, with
Big
Nicole
Little
Kidman,
Lies.
Big Little Lies, where he
And
was
he
the
was
abusive
okay in that
husband.
because he's abusive, but he just didn't just stand around looking threatening as opposed to acting as such.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
Oh, you just reminded me of him in, what was it, Hold the Dark? Or, is it Hold the Dark? What's it
Yes,
called?
it's Hold the Dark.
The one that lasted 6 hours.
Yeah,
Great.
I liked that a lot.
I did not.
But another fine entry in James Badgetale's list.
Ah, bless him.
He has
What's
3
your- what's
films
yourself?
coming out shortly, and I'm literally like reading the real life films going, is he going to make it?
Boom,
Is he going to make it?
No, he's not. That's the answer.
Oh
But
God,
yeah.
I hope he makes it.
That's it. Yeah. So
Oh, I
it's-
forgot Only the Brave too, which I forgot everything I watched.
You've watched more than you think.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But yeah, The Aftermath is not a good film. It's particularly
Rob, you're gonna watch
cringy because there's a scene where like it's very much trying to do a both sides thing where it's like, yes, the Allies bombed Hamburg and destroyed and killed lots of German innocent civilians, and we should feel sorry for them, and you should. And like, war is terrible and people do horrible things on both sides, but you don't then get to do a scene where your primary German character is brought into a room where he gets his denazification papers and is asked, did you know about the Holocaust? And have him act indignant and the film go, yeah, who are you to ask him if he knew about the Holocaust? It's a really, really awful, tonally misjudged piece of work.
Yeah.
That cast doesn't fill you with confidence.
No, it does not.
Like, I like Keira Knightley, but
So do I. But yeah, she does appear
it
to be a lot
really
of shite,
depends
though.
on the subject matter and who she's paired up with.
it really
And
does.
that cast list just wouldn't.
No, third Bill and Jason Clarke can go away.
That's just wallpaper.
You should swap them. The Aftermath would be a much better movie if Frank from
Hang
Serenity
on, I just
was in it.
realised none of them are German. That obviously
Yeah.
was international.
Alexander
It means
Skarsgård is
I know it.
generic enough.
I
He's like
imagine
foreign.
the whole go full German.
Yes,
That's
that's
generic,
Swedes do,
alright.
like, they always
Anyway,
cast a
I
Swede to
forget,
play, like,
though.
a German or a Russian or
Just put a V in
They're
for your
probably-
W's, you'd be grand.
generic somewhere in Northern Europe kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
thing.
Actually do better British accents than American actors doing British accents. It's quite uncanny.
Yeah, but I feel kind of bad for Americans trying to do English accents because they have to use a lot more of their mouth than they do in real life, and that just must be difficult.
Yeah, but they do use their mouth a lot, though. Because...
At
Yeah,
number
but it's very drawly.
Sorry, I'm feeling very bitchy tonight. Sorry,
number
I apologise.
6, it is The
Sorry,
Hole in the
America.
Ground. Opening at number 6.
Oh,
Which-
I'm
which-
going to see this weekend.
Me too.
And I'm going in
hopefully.
blind.
Okay,
And
well,
deaf.
I'm not going to say anything then, apart from the fact that, Grace, can you cover your ears?
Literally cover my ears. Okay, go ahead.
I quite enjoyed it. It's quite
Your
charming.
voice
and
is still
it's,
too loud.
okay.
He can't do any. That's as low as he goes. I've never heard him go any lower than that. He can whisper. Darren literally isn't capable of whispering.
Okay.
Great. This is why I'm so nice, because
It
I
is.
can't actually say nasty things
He
that
is,
the
'cause
person
he
I'm
cannot
talking about
whisper.
will hear. But yeah, okay, fine. The Hole in the Ground, I really, really liked it. It's very charming. It's a blending of
Charming,
three
it's
of...
a horror, isn't
I
it?
know, but it's got
Horror
that sort
movies
of...
can be charming.
Yeah.
It's got this sort of, it blends 3 of sort of what I would argue are 3 of the stronger horror movies of the past 20 years. I know you're going to disagree on this. The Descent, Babadook, and Without Name, which is a wonderful Irish horror film.
haven't
which
seen
is sadly
Without
under-
I
Name.
like one of
I'll
those.
do
I have
one
not
of
seen
those.
one of those, and I didn't like one of of those. So
Alright.
I think we're
All
going to
bets are
disagree on
off.
which ones though.
Yeah. But yeah, so The Hole in the Ground, I wholeheartedly recommend it.
It's on the list. I love Sean Cowslake, so I'll do that.
so do I.
All right, at number 5, and myself and Grace have seen this one. It's Fighting with My Family.
This is great.
It
This
is.
is such an enjoyable, fun, lively film where everyone in it is just got so much energy and they're so committed to it, and it's just wonderful. And it needs that, I think, because obviously, like, the world that you're portraying, which is wrestling, it's very high octane, very over the top, and not that, like, you know, this is over the top per se, but more just that it's completely sincere, I think, in its devotion to the premise, and it doesn't attempt to take the piss out of wrestling in any way, which I also appreciate, because I love wrestling, and I don't understand why people wouldn't like a soap opera with stunts. Okay, there's something wrong with you if this doesn't appeal to you.
One of the things I really like, and you're entirely right that it doesn't necessarily take the piss out of wrestling, in fact, it invests wholeheartedly in it, is the fact that, and I think
It's completely committed to how silly it all is, and I
Yes.
love that.
and this is something that I think that a prominent Irish film critic may have politely disagreed with me on, which is the argument that, like, so the film is very clear that wrestling is fixed, not fake.
Everybody knows that.
I know. The film is entirely
Some
clear.
people
on that
seem
as
to have a problem with this.
but
Don't. It's a show.
It's a
But
soap
anyway,
opera.
go on,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a
Soap
narrative.
opera
It's a
with
story that
stunts.
you're telling. Yeah. But the issue is, so it's established early on that the fight is fixed, not
Yeah.
faked. Because if it was faked, then my knee wouldn't bend both ways.
Yeah.
But the climax of the film hinges on a Rocky-style underdog in the ring moment, which naturally sort of contrasts with this idea of, like, if the fight is fixed, then how can you possibly have an underdog? If it's that sort of stuff.
But what?
But even within if maybe
But
this
it's narrative though.
Yeah, I mean, even within the world of wrestling, if you take that as a narrative with ongoing storylines,
Which
it is,
happens all the time.
This is a narrative trope that slots in there perfectly.
Yeah.
But no, it's it. But my argument isn't why I love it is because the film buys into it wholeheartedly. The film accepts that you know that it is, and the film knows and understands that, like, if a character is in a plucky underdog title match, they are probably statistically going to win. Not because it's a wrestling match that's fixed, but because you're watching a narrative about a plucky underdog in a titleship match. The idea is that the story that the film is telling is just as fixed as the wrestling depicted.
And
It's a
the
soap
wrestling-
opera. It's a soap opera layered on top of a
Well,
soap
all you
opera.
need to
It's
understand
glorious,
is that, though,
yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's glorious. I actually really like it.
How anybody could have difficulty with that, though, is beyond.
Well,
me.
I think this is one of the things where if you take a movie overly literally, where it's like, well, I don't believe there are stakes in this because I thought James Bond would die in this 25th James Bond movie. That sort of thing.
Who
You know,
takes films that seriously, though?
You'd be surprised. You would be
I can
very
think of
surprised.
at least one person.
Oh, I'm tired.
You would be
I'm
very
so tired.
surprised of people who will say, I didn't think that there were real stakes in the Bond movie because I never thought Bond would die, despite the fact
You
that...
shouldn't watch a Bond movie then.
Literally
That's the type
every
of person
film.
that
Like,
you are.
just tell somebody, like, if you want to go that route, like, you know, Kenneth Branagh wasn't in Dunkirk. Like, that's a film.
You're a liar.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, where do
He's
you go?
still there waiting for the French.
I'm getting tired now. I'm going to give it another decade and we'll see how that goes.
Just standing there with his cup of tea.
It's a film.
At number 4, Jay's favorite Best Picture nominee. I like how we're pushing it up as we
Jesus
go.
help us.
Larry Gloss.
It is... Do you want to guess how much Green Book has earned at the Irish box office to date?
Gazillions. Because
350,000.
everyone I know in work has gone to see it and they all love it.
250,000.
Keep going.
650,000.
Keep going.
1.74 million.
850,000.
Keep going. Oh, sorry. You're over.
I'm way too high.
You're no, you're not way too high.
1.2 million.
No, 917,000.
It'll make the million, probably.
It will easily make the million. It earned 102,000
I can
this
see
weekend.
why it's popular, though.
It's
And
a
they're
very easy
older
film
audience
to like,
skew
yeah.
as well, I imagine, and it'll get business.
Yeah.
Love those old people.
At number 3, it's How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, which is doing surprisingly well, given that it's like one of two.
It's animated.
Yeah, but it's one of
in
two
Ireland.
animated films competing at the same time.
They could have
like,
5,
you
they
would
could have
imagine
10, and they'd all make money,
the
Darren.
entire
Someday
top-
we're going to come in here and the entire top 10
It
is
will,
going to
and
be
they'll all
animated
have made
kids'
over a
movies.
million.
Yeah.
It's remarkable.
Yeah.
Insatiable appetite for animation.
Do you want
in
to
this country.
guess how much
all
this
the
is
60
kids.
million.
1.4 million
Yeah.
euro at the Irish box office
No,
to
not
date.
surprised. I am not surprised.
Fair enough.
At number 2, somehow,
Steady, Darren.
Instant Family.
Which is that again?
Mark Wahlberg adopts a bunch
Stop.
of
I don't want
kids.
to talk about Mark Wahlberg anymore.
I saw some people watching this on the plane, and from a distance it looks all right.
That is not a good recommendation.
Sorry.
Do you know I saw this from 20 yards away and it looked okay?
It looked fine.
There's an art to watching movies on a plane over the shoulder of the
There
person
is,
in
yeah.
front of you.
There's the stories about
Well,
it.
I regret to inform you that 99% of the people around me were watching Bohemian Rhapsody.
I don't know who it was, but remember
Were they
that-
rhapsodical about it? Oh,
Stop. Barry Jenkins drunkenly watched something over the shoulder of somebody and live tweeted on the plane once. I can't remember what it was now. He was drunk on whiskey and he was watching the film over and kind of commentating all the way through. I can't remember what the film was. But anyway, it was very good.
But I mean, like, and even like ignoring the snarky quality of it and stuff like that. And I don't think Jenkins was overly snarky. Jenkins is lovely. Jenkins is a really genuinely pleasant person.
Now he's somebody you can read on Letterboxd.
Yes.
But the thing with that is that, like, even watching a film over somebody's shoulder on a plane, which I've done several times, is it gives you a greater appreciation for how the film is put together visually. I imagine Bohemian Rhapsody over somebody's shoulder is like headache-inducing because of cut.
I imagine it's like that.
This was my problem. I wasn't going to watch it, but I'd seen so much of it from everyone around me that I was like, I better sit and watch it in order now.
I generally don't watch things over shoulder people on planes,
though. There were loads of cats.
And they each had their own room.
Yes.
But I will do, though,
which I approve of.
when I'm on the plane, is I will see what everybody's watching and quietly judge them.
Really?
All the time.
This is surprising to me.
There's another universe where we don't know each other and you're judging me. Because I also watched, like, the Nutcracker and the Four Elves.
I'm
judging you right here and now.
I'm doing that now, Grace. It's fine.
But judging me much more harshly.
Probably.
In the universe where you don't know me.
So let's talk about the Audience Award again, Jake.
Oh!
At number 1, the Lego Movie 2, and I'm glad to see it doing so well. It hasn't done as well as the original film. It's very good. I really liked it.
It's a lot of really serious listening if you're newer about it. I stumbled around to it, and I probably will at some point.
It's not going to trouble my top 10 in the year like the first one did. It probably won't make my top 40.
My top 10 as well.
Yeah, it probably won't make my top 40 even, but I really enjoyed it. It's pleasant, it's funny, it's charming. It's got a great cast, it's got a strong sense of what it's doing, and it builds logically on what came before.
I will probably end up watching it at home. I probably won't get to this.
Okay, cool.
Remarkable still knocking out number 1 though.
Yeah, which is pretty great. So far it has earned 1.7 million, which is good. Hopefully it'll get some way towards...
All the kids.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's move on to talking about the new releases in cinemas this week. And we have a special write-in ballad from Ronan, who would like you to know that everybody knows the new Asghar Farhadi film is grand.
Scorching take there from Ronan.
Also out this week, and I believe Jay has possibly seen this one, The Kindergarten Teacher.
I have. This is being shown at the IFI. I'm not sure if it's going beyond the IFI. This is...
I think it might be at the Lighthouse too.
Is it? Okay, excellent. This is a remake of an Israeli film from, I think, 2015, which I hadn't seen. And I wasn't even aware it was a remake on it. I kind of read after the fact. Both pretty well reviewed regardless. And it's directed by Sarah Colangelo, I think her name is. Yep. And it's starring Maggie Gyllenhaal as a teacher, a kindergarten teacher, the eponymous one, Lisa Spinelli, who is in this kind of slightly boring existence in the sense that she teaches kindergarten to these kids. She goes home. She's in a kind of a beige marriage to her husband. They get on okay, but it looks like it's a little dull. Their 2 kids are older and kind of ignore her a little bit. And she's doing this evening kind of poetry, kind of evening college poetry course presented by an extraordinarily handsome Gael Garcia Bernal with kind of grey hair and looking all cool.
When you say extraordinarily handsome, do you mean by like the standards of regular people like he always is, or do you mean like extraordinary by the standards of Gael Bernal?
By him, he looks great.
Okay.
And it's this, he plays it really well. He's this kind of slightly pretentious poetry teacher type, as you can imagine. But she wants to write poetry, and she wants to write, and her poems that she's written are kind of derivative and stuff like that. So, and as she's been told that, and she kind of knows it as well. And Gyllenhaal is probably as good a performance as I've seen from her.
Really?
And I like her. She's a magnificent actor. One of my favourites, and she is magnificent in this. But the film starts off in that kind of way. It's kind of your so drama that you've seen probably
a dozen times before.
But about 20 minutes in, one of the kids in her kindergarten class starts reciting a poem out of blue. 5 years old, and she's like, "Did he write that?" Like, and it seems to be his, so she writes it down. And then, that happens in the first act, so it's not really spoiler.
Yeah.
She passes the poem off as her own in the class to Rapture's kind of acclaim. So that kind of sends the film on a particular course, and it's a weird one because you think it's going to be a kind of not gentler but sort of quieter film from the beginning of it, but it turns into this strange and slightly queasy relationship drama between the kid and her, and it gets at this whole thing about the frustrated ambitions and dreams that you had when you're more younger that you now can realise through somebody
vicariously
else.
Through that, almost like the parents sort of. Yeah, and then
but I'll touch on that as well because she's disappointed her kids kind of spend their time on phones rather than reading and exploring life and stuff like that. And it's this kind of tinge of disappointment across it, and it just gets really intense and kind of quietly disturbing And because she plays it so softly, Jinhal, you don't really realise that there's red flags across the board on this, and really interesting things about kind of slightly dubious and dangerous kind of behaviours that cross lines of kind of propriety, and it's really, really good. And the kid that Parker Sefak, I have to look him up. First film, I think, and he's terrific.
Wow.
And the two of them together are great. And I know you're not a fan of Glazer's Birth, Darren. We've had this discussion before. Jonathan
This is Glazer, is it?
Yeah, Jonathan Glazer. You know the film.
Yeah,
Birth?
no, I'm familiar with Jonathan Glazer. I didn't know he directed this.
No, he didn't.
Oh, thank
saying,
fuck. Okay, cool.
No, I'm saying I know you're not a fan of that
Okay.
film, but this reminded me of it in various different ways. So I don't know,
Okay.
but you'll know what I mean. It's not quite the same film. And I'm
Okay.
not suggesting that, but it shares a certain amount of DNA with it. I'd say it's the only way I can describe it. But it's well worth seeing. And even if the film doesn't quite work yet, and I could see a couple of things probably irking people, I really liked it. But it's worth seeing for Gyllenhaal's performance because she is sensational.
Now, listeners, you've had Jay's recommendation for the week, but do you want that, or do you want the VimDiff audience recommendation of the week? Maiden is opening this week at the
It's
IFI.
pretty good though, in fairness.
Yeah. It is.
Okay, it's also like you don't have to
Jamming the
qualify.
audience.
Yeah,
I'm just like, oh, this
Well
actually
done, then.
yeah.
Pat the head for the audience.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I have very little faith in this nation's taste sometimes.
But so it's directed by Alex Holmes. It's the story of Tracy Edwards, a 24-year-old cook, on, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast, the first ever all-woman crew to compete
Living the dream.
in the Whitbread Round the World race in 1989. Apparently rapturous reviews. The audience absolutely loved it.
I love cinematic feats of endurance.
And then finally the big release of the week, which is Captain Marvel, which I
There's
believe...
3 films, there's nothing opening against it, is there?
Why would you open
I know,
against it?
Juggernaut.
Now, in fairness, there are 3 other films, but yeah. So in case listeners are curious, so Captain Marvel, which is surprisingly the first female-led film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the 21st film. It's also the first one to be co-directed by a woman, Anna Bowden, who works with Ryan Fleck, who was responsible for Mississippi Grind, which is massively underrated. Did they also do Little Miss Sunshine? I didn't. Okay, I thought it was a different team, but if it is, that's fantastic as well.
To the internet.
To the internet, Jay. But yeah, Captain Marvel, which has been in development for a very long time, and is arriving with far too much weight on its shoulders, and has naturally become a front in the culture wars, because of course it has, because no film like this can be anything but. And it's solid, it's grand, it's perfectly functional, it hits a lot of the core beats. But
Half Nelson.
Half Nelson is the other one they did.
Yes. Which is actually not bad.
Yeah. And Captain Marvel is grand. It's relatively sturdy and well made. It works better in little moments. It has one very big problem, which is a structural problem, which is that it is a movie, and again, I think this is something that's down to spoiler culture, and particularly how we talk about films, and particularly how studios encourage us to talk about films in this day and age. I'm thinking in particular of stuff like going to Skyfall and getting a note to critics telling them not to reveal a key point. But I'm also thinking of like the last Avengers film, Infinity War, which had Thanos demands your silence as a message delivered to critics. Blade Runner 2049, which I know that you're not a big fan of it, but which came with a note to critics telling them not to discuss any element of the plot of the film. There's a weird preference in modern film culture around the idea of like preserving surprise and treating everything as a twist, even though it doesn't necessarily need to be. The issue with Captain Marvel is that there is a big plot development that arrives about 1 hour and 15 minutes into the film that is theoretically a game changer, in that it completely upends what it believes to be the audience's understanding of the film that they're watching. The only problem is it is thunderingly obvious to anybody who has ever watched a movie before. In fact, if I were to give you a 2-line synopsis of the film, I bet you could guess the twist.
I probably wouldn't. I'm terrible at twists.
Okay,
but don't give me it though, because let's not.
Okay.
Let's not.
But the basic plot of it is that Vers is a human living on the Kree homeworld Hala. She woke up there without any memory 6 years ago. She's under the training of Yonrog, who is Jude Law, who leads an elite squad in their war against the Skrulls. The Skrulls are evil, shape-shifting aliens with green skin. They're ugly. They're sort of like vermin. They're treated as disgusting. Ben Mendelsohn plays the leader Talos, but otherwise they're prevailed as very atavistic. They crawl, they crouch, they cower. And basically the argument is the Kree believe that the Skrulls are a menace that are threatening to corrupt their social values, infect the world, and basically overthrow established social order. And Vers has become a soldier in this. In a conflict, she finds herself on Earth, and basically becomes embroiled in sort of this weird investigation into what might be her own past.
Okay.
So I'm fairly sure that from that synopsis, if you are particularly inclined, you can see a number of ways in which the plot can develop. There is one way in which the plot can develop that would not make it a truly monstrous piece of cinema, and it chooses that direction. But the issue is that in order to preserve surprise for the audience, it does not develop any of its three leads. It cannot spend any time developing or telling you who these characters are, because that would give the game away. So you don't get to spend any time with Jude Law as Yanrog, you don't get to spend any time with Ben Mendelsohn as Telos, and most damningly of all, you don't get to spend any time with Brie Larson as the eponymous Captain Marvel, or as Vers, as she is known on the Kree homeworld of Hela. And the issue is that this means that she's never really developed as a character, because she's not prying into stuff like her amnesia. She becomes a one-line Stark machine. There's a moment where Jude Law tells her, "I used to think you were funny." Or there's a moment where one of her colleagues says, "I never really liked you that much." And the film never gives you any idea why that is, because she doesn't have any personality beyond being a deadpan snarker. And the movie doesn't really work stylistically because of that, because you're waiting an hour and 15 minutes before you get to anything resembling character development. And it massively undercuts it. It's a shame, because there's a lot to like here.
Yeah.
The climax of the film is glorious in that it descends into, and I think somebody online described it as, a guy shouting at a woman on the internet with raised fists, "Debate me!" And it's amazing. It's these wonderful moments of catharsis. It's got a good sense of humor. Larson is charming. It gives Samuel Jackson a lot to do. It understands 90s pop culture in a way that very few films does. In particular, it sort of riffs off the idea of that sort of listlessness that you saw in the X-Files. It's got a great soundtrack, but it just doesn't really work on a larger sense. And that's not a big deal, because many of the Marvel films suffer from similar problems.
In fairness to the film, I think it's a couple of things I'll say. One, I've seen reviews of it and people talking about it that actually quite liked good chunks of it earlier on, then the ending was just typical Marvel thing. Yeah. And the second thing I'll say is, unfortunately for this film, I think there's a lot of work to get through, I imagine, in the context of, because Captain Marvel hasn't appeared in any of the previous films. It's a you know what I mean. You're starting off cold. You are starting off cold, and because you're starting with the premise of she's an amnesiac and she doesn't remember her past, and you're not going to reveal what that past is for an hour and a quarter. You've got nowhere to go with the character. There are. But I presume what you were talking about then is, people seem to be talking about what, and I'm not going to say it because I don't know that it's quite clear what happens, in the sense that people seem to be talking openly about, even in reviews.
Are they? Okay.
Well, I'll talk to you again about it. But I'm not sure.
Just not throw this on. But the film treats it as a surprise, and the film is edited to preserve it. It's like it's playing poker. Yeah. It's got two of a kind, and it's playing them really close to its chest.
Okay.
But that's it. I'll
probably see it anyway, because it goes on my 50 films by women list regardless. So.
And it is worth noting. Again, you say that it's a new character starting cold. I mean, stuff like Guardians of the Galaxy or Black Panther were also. I mean, relatively.
But I think but Black Panther wasn't to some degree. But I take your point. But I would also argue that Guardians of the Galaxy has it's an inbuilt team to kind of get her over the hump, where it's just one character.
Yeah.
I'll see it anyway.
All right, then. So that about wraps it up for us, I think.
There'll be nothing else this week.
If people are looking for a bit more Jay, a bit more Grace in their lives, where can they find you guys online?
At Jay Coyle on Twitter.
I am at Pixie Grace on Letterboxd and also Twitter.
You can find me at Darren_Mooney, where I co-host another podcast called The 250, looking at the IMDb's top 250 movies of all time. And this week, to mark the release of Captain Marvel, we're looking at one of only two Marvel Studios movies on the list, Guardians of the Galaxy, James Gunn's 2014, somewhat loaded now, ensemble teen piece.
Actually, just before we finish, can I say, the Runaway Bride joke? I was like, she jumps on it. Listen, it's good, right? She jumps on a DHL van or one of those UPS ones, and somebody says, "Where's she going?" It's like, I don't know, but she'll be there by 10:30 tomorrow. Boom. It's a great line.
It's a very 90s joke.
It is, but it's a great one.
I love it.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you do Chekhov's Runaway Bride joke.
You goddamn right, we're pros here.
Take it easy. We'll see you next week.
Later.
Bye.
Ow.